This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Fall 2023 New Jersey Film Festival Filmmaker Q&A series. Today we have Bill Basquin here. He's going to be talking about his wonderful documentary film. And I also have Anita Belle, who's one of our festival staff and also a juror for the festival. And we're going to be asking Bill a ton of questions about his film from inside of here. And before we do that, I just want to let you know the Fall 2023 New Jersey Film Festival means we are now celebrating our 42nd anniversary. I started this festival back in 1982. I'm Al Nigrin, and it's been a mission of mine to bring really great, thought-provoking cinema to Central New Jersey and New Jersey. And the festival has evolved over the course of the last 40 plus years. But we have a really wonderful lineup of movies for you to check out between September 8th and October 8th. There will be in-person screenings as well as online versions. And most of the screenings are on Fridays and Sundays. We stay away from Saturdays because there are football games and traffic is crazy around here on those days. So you want to check out our film festival. You go to njfilmfest.com. And I will show you at the end of the Q&A on how to do that and how to buy tickets and stuff. But anyway, welcome, Bill. Bill lives out in California. And tell us a little bit about how this film project came to be.
Well, I had made a few films about deer, and I grew up in the Midwest where deer hunting was really like visually prominent as as an imagery in the fall. And at a certain point, I was reading about in California, kind of like for the large predators, the amount of land necessary for maybe a large predator like a mountain lion to be able to have enough food. And I was reading that in most of the parks, it's not enough like contiguous land that it really is functional as an ecosystem. And then kind of from reading that stuff and from having made these films about deer, I developed an idea that I wanted to make a film about predators. And I had made also several films about ranchers, farmers, ranchers, and thought that this film would be a portrait style approach like those films are. And that ended up not being the case, but that's kind of how the idea came together. And then I went to graduate school in Southern California in 2012, and that was driving distance to a place where this subspecies of gray wolf was being reestablished. And very quickly I decided that that would be a project that I would do while I was there. Or I started it while I was there. I didn't finish it while I was there.
It's not a kind of traditional documentary film. In fact, it's a very personal film. I think it's just as much about you as it is about the Mexican gray wolf. And I like the way that you weave the two stories together. And the film is very meditational. It's a film that's also very experimental. And I love the spinning sequences are very close and dear to my heart because I like that as a trope in my own movies. And I just love those shots of you spinning and watching yourself spin, as well as you shooting the landscape.
Yeah.
Was that an important trope for you? And what did it signify?
It's more than one thing. Sometimes the spinning for me is a little bit of like it's like both a grounding technique, but also a kind of disorientation that's useful for being specifically in that place. Because I do usually spin until I'm so dizzy that I almost fall. And I just kind of, it's like a way for me to start anytime I go into the field and I don't quite know how else to start. I'll do that and it kind of gets me to be there. But then there's this other thing, especially with regard to the wolves, about sight and vision and the gaze. And one of the kind of research materials that I read was the Farley Moet book, Never Cry Wolf. And then I rewatched the movie that was based on the book. And that movie kind of ends with this, a voiceover that's about like the the narrators having seen the wolves that was actually part of their demise. And so I went into the project with the sense of the kind of the potential violence and danger of my presence and of my seeing them. And certainly when you start to think about the colonial violence in this on this continent, one of the things that you hear a lot about and think a lot about is like maps and mapping as like a tool of colonialism. And so I think particularly in the part of the film where I'm talking about the people who had lived there thousands of years ago, it was really important for me not to give the audience an image to focus on,
Mm.
for it to be more of an experiential sequence.
Wonderful. Anita, jump in, please.
Yeah, you mentioned that your film studies predators, specifically wolves. And over the 8 years that you made this film, you were often camping in territory that was mainly hunters, instead of hikers. Did you ever begin to feel like prey yourself, or how did your experience making this film change the way you viewed the predator-prey relationship?
I mean, that's like a really great question to ask in relationship to this. And I think before most of my trips were kind of like long weekends, but one of them I spent a month there. And before I was going for a month, um, people were asking me, well, aren't you afraid to camp alone in a forest with all these wild predators and you don't have electricity or telephone or anything like that? And I was like, really, I'm actually more afraid of the people that might be there than I am of the wild animals. Partly because the animals are likely to be afraid of me. I mean, it's not grizzly country, so I would probably feel differently about camping in grizzly country. It's like black bear country, and I've camped a lot around black bears. And there's certain things that you do to sort of make yourself slightly safer.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was, I think of that as a part of the country that's like racist and homophobic, and where that stuff is expressed with violence toward people and their bodies. And there was a lot of hostility toward the wolves and the wolf repopulation. And I just didn't know how readily that hostility might turn toward me,
Mm.
because that's the reason I was there. And I didn't necessarily say that to every hunter that I encountered in the forest, but I said it to some of them, and I was kind of afraid to say it.
Mm.
I just didn't know how they would feel about it. So that was sort of an interesting dynamic to go into a place where like I mean, I was using myself as like an experiential organ to read the place, but I was also like scared shitless
Mm.
about how people might receive me. And so that made it so like when I went into town, I didn't really want to talk to anybody, which is kind of weird to go to a place that you're trying to like learn about and then not really want to talk to anybody.
The interaction with the fish and game person, fish and wildlife person, was interesting, that you kind of pepper your documentary with. And for us over here in New Jersey, they're stocked with hunters. I mean, and there's been this bear hunt every year, and despite the governor's saying that he was going to cancel, he canceled it 1 year, but then he reinstituted it on a smaller scale, I must say. But it seems as if for them, repopulating the Mexican gray wolf is not about helping the species, but providing stock to have, animals to be shot by hunters. And you point that out in the documentary.
Yeah.
I wonder how you really feel about it, since your response was somewhat muted in the doc. And I wondered if that's something that, how you feel. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I want to say that there's an interview in the film where I'm talking to a fish and wildlife guy and I'm asking him about that. And so the repopulating the species is mandated by the Endangered Species Act, and that's carried out on a federal level.
Right.
But then Fish and Game is a state level organization.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's got different names in different states, but it's
Right.
basically like a hunting and fishing entity. And so once a species becomes delisted from the Endangered Species Act,
Hmm.
then it's possible for them to be hunted and the state to issue hunting license for that. And that's like, I mean, partly what that guy says in the movie, what the guy says in the interview is, I mean, I was allowed to interview him because he is palatable and is able to say kind of the party line.
Right.
And, you know, I kind of am trusting the audience to be able to discern that that's what they're hearing. And yeah, like you said, like, I don't necessarily say what I think about it. I mean, there's a little bit, you can get a sense of that from how I ask the questions sometimes, and then how he responds to the question I'm asking. But I think, you know, what he ends up saying is that the species being delisted and then being able to be hunted is like a kind of mark of success. But
Success, yeah.
But that's a PR spin on it. And you know, it's a PR spin from a particular point of view. And the other value of that interview is that it does give you a sense, albeit like filtered through the PR lens, of a point of view that maybe isn't the point of view of people who are, you know, wanting wolves to be repopulated. It's a totally different worldview.
Right.
And yeah, so I mean, I think I ended up, the business of repopulating a species is weird enough, and it's like, you know, the animals that are in the wild, at least in terms of this wolf program, aren't considered like essential animals. They're considered like an experimental population, and the animals that are considered essential are the ones that are in captivity. And so if you're like, oh, I want there to be like wild predators, that's really weird, because the ones that are protected are the ones that are captive. And you know, it's really hard to be in favor of that if you're really into there being wild predators. But that's who's doing the repopulating. And the other weird thing is that the people who are doing the repopulating are the direct descendant of the same organization that you know, hunted and poisoned them to near extinction in the first place. So it's that's very strange as well.
Yes, very, very disheartening.
Yeah.
I mean, we need wolves to be part of the ecosystem for it to thrive, and you know, it's unfortunate that the bottom line is always what's most important, right? The dollar, the cattle ranchers don't want wolves, and and anyway, Anita, I see to you.
Keeping in the same realm, I don't want to give anything away, but the film discusses this idea of herding wolves to help them. And I'm a big animal lover, and when I first heard that in the film, it's something that stuck with me for days. I know, like, it's in that conversation with the fish and wildlife specialist, and I just kept thinking about that idea. And I wondered if hearing that impacted your film, or the message, or the editing of how you constructed the film.
Well, probably, yeah. I mean, I think I spent a fair amount of time reading the actual, I think it's called 10J. It was like the experimental rule that they wrote, and it's really, really long. And then I read a lot of the comments, and it's like these online documents. And you know, they talk about what you're asking about, which is, I think, is the hazing that they sort of advocate as a technique to get the wolves to be afraid of people, because part of the management of the wolf presence is that, you know, the people are like proliferating cattle, and the cattle aren't necessarily their preferred food source, but they would become a food source under certain conditions. And so it's like this thing of like trying to keep the wolves and the people separate, and one of the things is to make them afraid.
Right.
And there is a point in the interview where I ask the person a question about that, and you can see that his point of view in relationship to the question is totally different from where the question's coming from. But yeah, I mean, there's a scene in the film where it becomes clear that the wolves viewed me as an apex predator. Like, there's this point where the wolf does something that I think of as prey behavior, where they get far enough away and they and they turn around and they watch to see what I'm gonna do. And that was a learning experience for me. I was like, oh shit, yeah. That's the state that we're at, is that the people are, I mean, people talk about that all the time, like, the Anthropocene and all that. That's what it means, is like that people have sufficiently skewed the balance that they're the apex predators. And so part of what I was looking for in going to places like the Gila cliff dwellings, where there's like a sort of like a museum exhibit, is like evidence of a relationship between people and wolves that is different from that like predates that. And and what I found is that the people were, what it looked like to me was that the people were afraid of other people, kind of like I was. I didn't find evidence that they were afraid of the wolves. I mean, they may have been, but what it looked more like is that the wolves and the people were sort of compatible in sharing the same resources, and in fact that they seemed to move over the same pieces of ground with the seasonal fluctuations of water and game and other food sources.
Cool. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the way that you generate the narrative.
Yeah.
I think both of us had that same question, because Anita was nice enough to share her questions with me, but I did have it down on my list too, Anita. And we both wondered about how you moved from, why you decided not to use the voiceover all the way through, instead of having that punctuate the film and provide more information, narrative wise, by using intertitles.
Yeah.
Why not use one all the way through? Or why did you use both of them?
Yeah. Well, to me, the voiceover and the intertitles do really different things. I feel like the voiceover is kind of informational. And the intertitles are, I mean, they're informational also, but in a different way. And I don't exactly use the intertitles to tell you how I feel, but I use them to narrate interactions or moments where I'm hoping that the audience will have a feeling. And I think as a filmmaker and as somebody who's mostly seen films that are contemporaneous with mine, I've seen them in film festivals. I've gotten to hear a lot of voiceover, and I don't always like it. And I was actually really afraid to use it. I didn't want to use it, but it is useful for some things. And so I feel like it's sort of asking a lot of the audience to both to read the intertitles, but also to listen to the voiceover. And so I wanted, and the other sounds that were present in the place were so important to me. And I wanted part of the audience's experience to be about learning by hearing those sounds. So that's part of why I didn't make it be about my voice, but partly my voice kind of goes away at a certain point in the middle of the film and comes back later. And I think part of what I wanted is for the audience's relationship to that narration to change, but to change by it not being there, and then to for them to kind of want that companionship again by the end of the film. And I think that it does that. But it was something about wanting to create desire. And it's maybe funny to talk about this film in terms of desire, because it's like about endangered species, but that's how I was thinking about it when I was editing.
Cool. I mean, I like the intertitles because they're quiet.
Yeah.
And that's I think the most zen moments in the movie, even though you're getting information, it's just a black background with white letters, and it's very peaceful, much like the shot behind me, which is from your film.
Yeah.
And where we get to kind of hang out with you while you're investigating this, which I think is really nice. Anita, please, one more from you.
I have to say that the way you're able to capture the landscape and the quiet moments, it almost, when I was watching it, almost felt like I was there, like I could really hear and feel the whole surrounding. It's so well done, but I was just wondering how nature came to be such an important part of your life and your life's work?
I mean, it probably has to do with having grown up. I mean, I grew up in the rural part of Indiana. I mean, I was born in a rural part of Indiana, and then we moved to Wisconsin and spent a fair amount of time in a rural area there. And I think that that probably shaped my a sense of aesthetics, and certainly my like childhood play was mostly outdoors, like in the woods or by the pond or in the cornfield. And so I think it's something about space and the imagination, like
Mm.
space as in like the kind of space that I'm, thinking of, but also in, is, but also, then later my dad was a cattle rancher and my mom dated a guy who was a deer hunter. And so I sort of had access to the subject matter through people that, um, you know, basically through people that my mom had dated. And I had the interest, but then I had the access, and so it just became this attraction that I followed and have been following on various twists and turns. Yeah,
Your film is very meta. And by meta, I mean it's really about making the film, because in a way, your film shows you how you're making the movie.
yeah.
Was that something that you also wanted to share with your audience? I mean, I think you have a prehistory, since we showed a couple of your films at our Super 8 festival, a good decade and a half ago or something like that. And I wonder if that's something that you, I mean, because it is a very autobiographical film. We get information about your dad, about your growing up. So it's about meta you and meta about the process of making the film. Is that something that you enjoy presenting, or?
I think the way that I think about the subject matter in it that's would be considered personal
Mm,
is that I'm using myself. I mean, much in the way that I use myself in the place to read the place.
mm,
I'm using myself, and it is, I do talk about personal stuff, but I'm using myself more as like a body or a character for the audience to be able to connect
mm,
through. And it almost doesn't matter that the details are from my life. I think what matters is that it's a person or a character who's having these feelings or these experiences, and everybody can, I think, use that as a mechanism for also having feelings.
mm,
And that's what I wanted. It's less to me about being autobiographical, though. I think one of the things is that I've been making films now for more than 20 years, and I did put a short excerpt from an earlier film in this film, and I think that's probably something that you just consider doing when you've been doing what you do for a while, where and you think about your body of work over time kind of amounting to, it is information about me, but it is other things as well.
mm.
And I think that there wouldn't really be any way that it wouldn't also give information about me, having been like something that I made for a long time, but also something in a long line of things that I've made.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think every film is autobiographical to
Yeah,
a certain extent, right? It's just how overt it is,
yeah.
how latent it is. But Anita, please, you get the last question.
I know that you say that you learned about the wilderness throughout your entire experience being in there, even while you were sleeping. And that was so interesting to me because we spend like a third or a quarter of our life sleeping, but nobody really thinks about what we're experiencing while we're sleeping. So I was just wondering if you had a specific experience or any information that you remember gaining while you were sleeping in the wilderness.
Yeah, I mean, that's really about sound to me, and like sleeping in a tent. If you're inside the tent, then you're not out there, and like the birds are not as they're not disturbed by your presence in the same way if they can't see you. And so they're the bird song, especially like the bird song that happens like first thing in the morning,
Mhm.
is so much more vibrant because they're not worried about like, are you a threat? Because they get used to your tent after a while and then they just do their thing. But yeah, it's like you can be kind of half awake and hear stuff and know things because of it. And that's kind of, even if I'm sleeping in the vehicle at that place, but with the windows rolled up, I don't get as much sound information as I do if I'm in the tent. And um, it's just a specific kind of immersion that's available to that way of working. And I came to think of it as an important part of my methodology while I was doing it. And I think that the other thing, Ali, you were asking about the meta and the method of making, and I do think of my methodology as as a kind of character in the film.
Very cool. Okay, folks, let me show you how you can buy tickets to see this wonderful film. I'm first going to send you to our regular website, which normally would have been the place you would go to get everything. But because of COVID, we now are participating with Eventive, who's our streaming provider. We've used them since 2020, and we've done every festival using them. We're now a hybrid. We're able to now have in-person screenings, but we have people from all over the world that still wanted to participate. So I didn't want to remove that. We have one lady from Oklahoma who watches everything. And, we have people that are now part of our audience. So it's a hybrid festival. Films are available for 24 hours. And they're also in-person screenings. So when you get to our homepage, which is njfilmfest.com, you would click on current events, which will just basically bounce you below this welcome page. By the way, that's the screening space, and that's where you'll come for the in-person screenings. It bounces you one below, and this is just a placeholder for you to be able to click this red button that'll bounce you to our festival website, which is now part of Eventive. And here you can get an overview of the festival. This is our catalog page, but please click around the site. Back to Festival site is a great place to start. This is our welcome page, and it gives you basic information. It's pretty vanilla, but if you need to get driving directions and information about our staff and sponsors, this is where you want to go. But all of these other buttons are things that you should click on. If you want to buy an all access pass, which is a great deal because basically you get to see all the movies at half price, you click on that, you can buy one of those. If you want to see the schedule in a kind of linear fashion, and you can scroll down to find out more about each and every film, each program is separated by a red line. And so we work our way down because from inside of here is going to be screened on Sunday, September 24th. Here's the picture from the movie. It's online for 24 hours and in person at 5 p.m. Belle is hoping to come to the in-person screening. So there'll be an opportunity for you to interact with him if you come to the in-person screening as well. And that'll be at 5 o'clock on the 24th. And if you want to get more information, just kind of work your way back to the top of the page and hit Film Guide. And you can get more information about each and every film by clicking on the little posters that are there. So general admission is $15. And that means that gives you access to the movie in person as well as online. And yes, we have some crazy people that watch the movie during the day and then come in the evening and watch it again and ask the filmmaker questions when they're available. So it's a really wonderful thing, and I hope all of you will come to join us. Bill, I want to say thank you for hanging out with us for the last half hour. Anita's always got great questions, so she's wonderful. And thank you so much for doing that, Anita. And hope to see you at the movies. Again, the festival runs from September 8th to October 8th on Fridays and Sundays. And Bill's film will be on Sunday, September 24th, all day, all night for 24 hours online or in person at 5 p.m. So come and hang out with us. Thanks again, Bill.
Thank you.